Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Just one moment, please. Let me just check. All right, great. So let's get started with today's class. This is our first class for XAT and the XAT revision for your verbal section of XAT, essentially. The XAT verbal section is called VALR. Just give me one moment. Right, the XAT verbal section is called verbal ability and logical reasoning, right? So that's why they call it VALR. This is so I'll give you a basic introduction about VA specifically, but also the general English section of the XAT paper. We'll discuss how to prepare the VA questions specifically today, and we'll also see if there's any overlap with CAT, if we can use any other areas for practice, any other areas, by that I mean any other papers for practice for your XAT exam. So I'll discuss where to practice from and how to practice. So let's start with today's class. Those of you who are taking the exam, I just want all of you all to actually contribute and do let me know what you think. What are your doubts for the XAT exam? What you think is different about the XAT exam from the CAT in comparison, and so on and so forth. So do ask me your doubts. Okay. So for starters, this is a screenshot from the Career Launcher website, and we have a detailed analysis each year. So this is just the VALR analysis. One moment, please. Right. Sorry about that. So to resume, this is from the 2024 paper, and we have an analysis of each year's XAT paper. I really expect you to go through this. It'll be actually quite helpful in terms of you knowing what to prepare. So if you notice, XAT will ask usually 26 total questions from your verbal ability. This has more or less remained the same. The breakup of these questions into two things. One is, we'll say, RC and VA. So RC is one, and all of these could be considered as VA. So this kind of breakup has changed over the years. Sometimes, if you notice here, 13 questions are RC questions. This is the 2024 paper. In the prior years, sometimes there were 14 questions which are RC questions, sometimes fewer. But usually around these many RC questions you can expect. 5 RCs were asked in 2024. In 2023, they had asked 4 RCs and the total number of questions was 12. Right, so there's a little bit of change here and there in this broad breakup between RC and the rest of the questions. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, the other thing that we want to notice is the kind of questions that are being asked. Right, today we'll specifically focus on these questions, which is the VA type, which is fill in blanks, critical reasoning, grammar, parajumble, how to study them, what kind of questions are asked, so on and so forth. Right. Okay. So before we get started with these, RCs are very similar to CAT. In fact, XAT is the only exam compared to the other MBA exams. XAT is the only exam which comes really close to CAT. In fact, the reason is that from 1991 till 2008 CAT was paper based. I've of course spoken about this multiple times before because this is important. It's important because this exam is the CAT paper, especially from 1991 till 2008, is sort of the the foundational way to create these verbal aptitude papers. So most of the question types that you see here, these types, actually were originally, asked in these papers. So the RCs, sometimes the ZAT RCs can be quite long, sometimes they can be quite hard, right? In fact, the ZAT RCs nowadays meaning I'm being quite generic here, but nowadays meaning, let's say over the past 10 years, the ZAT RCs usually have been much harder than the CAT RCs usually. Now, if you go to the 2002 to 2008 CAT papers, you will find multiple difficult level RCs, similar to the ZAT RCs. Of course, these are slightly longer, but they're actually important. You'll also find some poems in there somewhere. And of course, these questions you can find from 1991 CAT paper till 2008. Now, why is this important? Because this paper, the CAT paper, led to all these other exams formulating their papers, and that's actually where you should go to practice these questions from. So previous year CAT papers from 90 until 2008 are a great source for all of you to practice from. One moment, please. All right. So that's where I expect all of you to practice these questions from. The nature of the RC is quite similar, and the fill in the blank questions, critical reasoning questions, all of these questions are actually asked in CAT back then. Now, of course, we know CAT no longer asks these questions. So we'll usually, considering most of us do take the CAT exam and very few of us only take the ZAT exam, we'll use the CAT exam as a frame of reference for us to define the level of difficulty, define how to solve these questions, and so on and so forth, right? So one is for practice, use the prior CAT papers, which is 90 until 2008. And of course, all the prior ZAT papers. These are obviously really important. You'll find them online. You'll find them, the ZAT papers, you'll find them with the answer keys because they've been officially released. All right. So this is where we practice these questions from. If you notice, this number changes. In 2023, there were 7 critical reasoning questions, right? And there were no parajumbles, 0 parajumbles. This, I would say, is a major change in terms of how the solving process goes. One of the benefits of the ZAT parajumble is that, of course, it's a difficult question type. It's quite difficult, but it's unlike the CAT parajumble. The ZAT parajumble has options, right? It's not a TITA type. So since it has options, we can actually solve it faster, and we sort of have help. We can use the options to reconstruct the paragraph, and there is a level of accuracy. Of course, you have to invest a certain amount of time, but there's a level of accuracy in the parajumble question in that which is higher than the level of accuracy than the critical reasoning questions, because the parajumble in ZAT has options. So in short, if you find a parajumble question in ZAT, it will usually have options, and usually students' accuracy for this would be better than, generally speaking, better than most of the critical reasoning questions, simply because of options. All right. So again, broadly speaking, for all of you to keep this in mind, that if it's a year, of course, that they ask you 0 parajumble questions, then we are all in the same boat, and we all have to make sure our accuracy for critical reasoning questions is really good. But if it's a year where they are going to ask you like this, which is 2 parajumble questions and 5 critical reasoning questions, make sure that you do solve these 2, because these will have options. All right. So the major or the sort of difficult areas in your VA in the ZAT exam are these: critical reasoning and parajumble. These are, if you consider the critical reasoning question type, which is asking us application based questions to strengthen the author's opinion, conclusion, to weaken the author's conclusion, uh, to infer something, to assume something, so on and so forth. These type of questions are obviously asked in CAT. And this question type, basically, generally speaking, the critical reasoning question type and the parajumble question type, Broadly speaking, in an English paper, these are usually the most difficult areas, usually, right? So same thing applies to that. The grammar and fill in the blanks. Now these are usually both grammatical, like they can be asked in a grammar way or they can be asked in a vocab or usage way, right? And grammar, if you notice, they are saying correct, incorrect sentences. This is actually the most common way of asking any grammar questions in the past several years in that. They essentially give us some version of a sentence correction question. Now, I would say that these question types are not as difficult as compared to all the others that are asked in the XAT exam. And I'll also discuss how to prepare for these question types very briefly. Right? So keep this idea in mind. I'll just get to that shortly. In any case, we are expected to solve 26 questions. These are the questions, and most of the questions will be predominantly RCs, either 12 or 13 questions from RCs. All right. Um, okay. So now I want to discuss each question type in a little bit of detail. That is, I want to show you what the question is asking of us, and I also want to discuss a little bit about where to practice these questions from, where we can make improvements, so on and so forth. Right. So we'll get started with that. Uh, let's look at the critical reasoning question types. We'll just go through them one by one. Based on the above information, which of the following statements must be true? Now, this kind of a critical reasoning question can be asked and is asked by XAT in three different ways. Three meaning essentially the length of the original source changes. Sometimes it will be a short passage, right? It could be like a 200-word passage. Let's just throw a random number out there. A 200-word passage. It could be a 350-word passage, right? Or it could be a regular RC in which they've asked this question, right? And the RC would be then maybe, let's say, 450 words. So that will ask this type of question or this type of question in across these many words, right? The question type here is basically, we can call this an inference question type. It's saying, based on the information in this passage, suppose, which of the following must be true, meaning that there are four options given, or five options since it's that, and these five options would each have some word which is problematic. We of course have seen this format before in CAT. And we have to essentially evaluate, let's say, all the four options A, B, C, D are incorrect because we find those words problematic. In D also there's a problematic word, but there is something in the passage which justifies this problematic word. So therefore we are saying option D is a possible answer and must be therefore true. So based on some piece of evidence, we are accepting a conclusion, right? Conclusion based on evidence. So this is what an inference is. Inference is a conclusion based on evidence. So this is an inference question. Which of the following statements can be best concluded from the paragraph? The same question as question 1, right? Then let's look at question 3. Which of the following best describes any relationship of the first paragraph with the second paragraph? Which describes the relationship of the first paragraph with the second paragraph. The way I see this question type is, this is basically a main point question type. What is the main point of the author? You'll have seen this question many times. The reason why I call this a main point question type is because to know why the first paragraph was asked, right? You know what role it was playing, right? In short, this means you know what role it was supposed to play. So you know the point that the author wanted to get across to you. The same thing with the second paragraph. Why was the second paragraph given to you? You again know the point that the author wanted to specifically get across to you. Then if you notice the relationship between the first paragraph and the second paragraph, then that relationship is predominantly trying to show us some specific point that the author is trying to get across. For example, the first paragraph could be some example. A study has shown that taking some kind of medicine leads to some outcome. Then the second paragraph is an interpretation of that study, right? So the relationship between the first and the second paragraph was, in this case that I'm saying, that the first paragraph was an example and the second paragraph was an explanation of that example, which gave us some specific main point. So in short, this question is trying to ask us, why is this information given in this specific fashion, which is basically a main point question, right? So we have looked at two inference questions. These are inference questions, and we have looked at one main point question type. Which of the following best summarizes the above passage? We know this question type really well. Of course, CAT has a para summary question. We all know that. And apart from the CAT para summary question, we also know that a summary is asked in RCs as well, and XAT will usually do that. XAT will give us, unlike the CAT para summary question, which is usually like a 200-word passage, XAT has sometimes asked this question from a 400-word passage, so on and so forth. So that's only the so-called distinction. What could the author be trying to prove? Another main point question, right? What is the purpose of the author? Why is the author talking to us? Why is the author trying to say something specific, right? The author is trying to prove something. So that's a main point question. Which of the following will be a most meaningful conclusion? Another inference question type. Which of the following statements most seriously weakens the conclusion drawn in the passage? Weakens and strengthens this. Which of the following strengthens the conclusion? Which of the following weakens the conclusion? This question type has been asked many times by XAT. In fact, if you leave the past 3-4 years, it used to appear regularly in the exam. In the past 3-4 years, it's in one of the years it was not asked, but otherwise usually this question type is asked. Seriously weakens or strengthens the. This word can change. Conclusion can be replaced with hypothesis, uh, argument, so on and so forth, right? But it's asking us to do something which is take the author's opinion and weaken that opinion, or take that author's opinion and strengthen that opinion, right? So this is what is trying, expecting us to do. And which of the following can be best inferred from the paragraph above? These are your critical reasoning questions. These are best found in previous year XAT papers, previous year CAT papers 91 till 2008, especially, and of course, all the RCs from 2008 till present from CAT, right? And same thing applies from XAT. Since the start, you can simply solve previous year XAT papers, and you will find all of these question types in there, right? I've conducted VA classes online on our channel, and I've gone through these VA question types, all of these question types in detail for the CAT exam. The solving process and even the level of questions that I've discussed, all of it applies to the XAT exam. So if you're planning on taking XAT, and if you're, you can dedicate enough amount of time and you can go through some classes and you need some help, so please go through the prior VA classes that I've done for CAT. But I guarantee you that the critical reasoning questions, and even the RC questions, will be applicable to the XAT exam as well. All right. Okay, now the grammar and fill in the blank questions, and I'll also discuss how to prepare for these questions. Just a moment. All right, Satyam, we have a few sessions for XAT and lined up for XAT, so I'll be taking those sessions. Do leave, your requirements or whatever doubts you may have in the comment section, and I'll try and address them in the next session that we have planned. So to look at the grammar and fill in the blank question types, you want to look at these four, which are basically sentence correction variants, right? Which of the following sentences have incorrect usage of preposition, right? Uh, in terms of incorrect usage of preposition, here is an incorrect usage of grammar. Since we are using one concept, we should ideally say incorrect usage of the preposition, which is a grammatical concept. But in any case, this is the question, so we don't have to analyze the question. If you notice, these are all sentence correction types, variants, and they're asking us to choose grammatically correct or incorrect sentences. Again, great source, same thing, CAT paper, right? And you'll find a lot of questions actually repeat themselves. Now for grammar and vocabulary, and this, by the way, this will apply to NMAT, SNAP, XAT also, of course. But what you want to remember is, in a given short amount of time, suppose you want to prepare for vocab, right? I say ki in your NMAT, SNAP, and XAT exam put together, let's say, you'll get, this is a way upper limit. Let's not expect these many, but let's say upper limit 15 vocabulary questions, right? How much time are you willing to put in for these 15 questions? Okay. One of the things that students often like to do is that they want to go through flashcards or word power made easy and books and all to improve their vocabulary, which is actually useful, but to a certain degree. Only if you have unlimited amount of time, then that kind of practice can really be useful. What I prefer is that, and this applies to grammar and vocabulary, by the way, is that all of these exams, all of these aptitude exams, verbal aptitude exams, especially the MBA verbal aptitude exams, all of them will ask questions in grammar and vocabulary from a pool of questions. It's a big pool, right? It could be, we can say, a 2000 question pool. That's again upper limit, but they ask questions from this big pool of questions. That pool of questions can be found in previous year CAT papers, previous year XAT papers, NMAT papers, SNAP papers, so on and so forth. I've also told all of you all before, it sounds silly, but it's actually applicable. And some of the questions are harder than NMAT, SNAP, and XAT. Is the RBI grade B exam. And if you look at the verbal paper, again, really good questions you'll find in terms of vocabulary and grammar, which will hold up to the NMAT and SNAP level for sure. Now, the reason why, even though, and of course, the banking exam papers. Now, the reason why these aren't recommended by teachers usually is because, generally speaking, the level of difficulty of banking exams like SBI Bank, PO, doesn't apply to these exams. But the way I see it is, from those 2000 questions, or how many ever big pool of questions, the easier ones are asked by SBI PO, some of the harder ones are asked by NMAT, SNAP, and XAT. But if you look at, let's take a synonym question. I give you one word, right? And I ask you, which out of these four, which is the best possible synonym of this word, right? Is it A, B, C, or D? Correct? So you're going to learn about the easy words and hard words and every other kind of word in this entire pool of questions. So my preference is, if you have a short amount of time, if you want to prepare for an exam and not simply work on your vocabulary, the preferred method is to solve a lot of questions and to keep a track of the ones you get wrong. So preferably an Excel sheet or somewhere where you can record all the questions you got wrong, or maybe you can copy paste a question itself and the explanation and answer in terms of vocab, key, what is the meaning of each word. In terms of grammar, if you got a sentence, let's say they've given you 4 sentences and D is the incorrect sentence that you're supposed to identify, you didn't figure out why. In fact, you just went with A being incorrect. So record this error, and this recorded error, I want you to then put this in an Excel sheet, right? And in such a way that you can actually revise this before the exam. So instead of going to a book for grammar, by the way, people often ask a book for grammar. The go-to book that you should use is Renan Martin. Now, the reason why I recommend Renan Martin is, most of the people who are creating the papers for you, setting up the papers for you, are actually studying from, or have actually studied from, Renan Martin. So that's the source that we use. In grammar and vocab, but especially grammar, go to the book only for 10% of your time, right? Only when you get a question wrong and you want to figure out what are prepositions, for that brief moment, you go to the textbook. Otherwise, don't go to the textbook. What I want you to rather do is solve as many questions as possible and make a repository of those questions so that you can actually, within a certain time frame, let's say 4 hours, 5 hours, you can actually revise those questions, right? So I expect you to make an Excel sheet for practice from this big pool of questions. I hope that's clear. Those of you who are watching right now, please tell me if this is clear to you, what practice I'm recommending to all of you all, right? uh, so don't spend too much time in the textbook for your grammar. Don't spend too much time reading or memorizing flashcards for your vocabulary. Spend a lot of time solving previous year papers. I've made a list of those papers. Keep a record of the questions that you especially get wrong and make that a revisable record, so something that you can revise in 4 hours, 5 hours, like I said, and that will be actually useful. So this is what I feel is more useful for from a exam point of view. All right. So now we'll get to solving some of the questions, but like those of you who have done classes with me before, like Satyam and others, you know that I insist on this: the basic fundamentals that are being tested in a verbal paper, in an MBA verbal paper, is that whether we can simplify any information and whether we can evaluate that information, right? So this is what is being tested broadly in the VA section, in the critical reasoning section, right? I'm not talking about grammar and vocab here, but the critical reasoning and verbal part. The thing that we want to reduce a written passage to, the passage could be 200 words, 400 words, anything. It could be a parajumble, right? This could be a parajumble, each a different length of sentence, and we have to rearrange this. But what we to rearrange this in a coherent way, or to answer a question from a paragraph which is very specific, that tells us what the top that tells us that we should know what the topic of the author is, right, about topic A, and what specifically about the topic the author is saying in blank B, right? The more we can reduce this to a specific way, uh, the more we can reduce a passage to a specific nub, the better our ability to manipulate it and then answer questions based on it, right? So this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to take a longer chunk of information and reduce it to these two blanks. All right. So again, please go and look at the prior classes that I've done for CAT, and I've discussed this concept in detail, and it would be clear to you. All right. So we are still trying to do this. We are trying to reduce a topic to what is the topic and what about the topic the author is saying. Let's keep this idea in mind. All right. Now I just want you to get started with the parajumble question and type in your answers. I'll just wait for a brief moment and I'll discuss what is the right way to solve the question after that. Everyone knows parajumble questions, so please get started. All right. Uh, let's start with this question. I know people have not yet typed in their answers, but I'd like to get started with the question anyway. Okay. We have to get through a few questions, so that's why. Right. Uh, it's a parajumble question with options. What you want to remember, there's a basic method to solve the parajumble question, which I've discussed in depth again in prior classes. I'll go through it again. Since there are options, we can at some stage sort of supplement our solving process or interrupt our solving process by checking with the options, right? But let's try and not do that too early, right? If we start looking for patterns here too early, we end up making mistakes. So first we try and read and make some mandatory pair. Now always remember that we'll read from E to A, right? We'll read in this order. The reason is A to E is the worst possible order. It's the order written by the examiner to confuse us. So we want to read from E to A. While reading from E to A, we are trying to do two things. One is we are trying to map in our minds what is the general topic or general conversation that is going on here in each sentence, and what about the topic the author is saying, right? So this is one thing that we are trying to do. The other thing that we are trying to do is we are trying to notice some clues or connections to some sentence before or after, right? And both these methods are going to help us align this mixed up passage in the right way, correct? So once I know what the topic of the author is, I generally know what the narrative direction is, from where the author is proceeding to where. The other thing is, if I have clues and connections, then I can make a mandatory pair, right? So we'll discuss that process. Remember, I'm not looking for, and I'm not basing my solving process at all on what sounds like a opening or closing statement, right? The reason why I don't look for opening or closing statements on how they sound is because since examiners know that, they'll often create questions which have multiple statements which sound like opening statement, but they're not opening statements. So don't fall into that trap. Don't look for opening or closing statements. Just simply look to make mandatory pairs. Now, mandatory pairs are those pairs which tell us. Now, let's look at sentence C. Things started to change once again around a decade ago when Amazon began selling some of its spare server capacity. Sentence is very easy, but what the words once again told me that prior to sentence E, at some stage, things changed, right? There was first change somewhere. This first change then got replaced by the second change here, which is a decade ago, right? All right. Now, they mostly ran on chips made by IBM and HP, the big tech of the day, right? So, they is referring to something specific in sentence D. I need to find out what that is, and then I can make a mandatory pair, right? If there's some specific, let's say, sentence X here, and that is referring to this day, then I'll find that unit, right? And then I can start to look for any possible connections. But I can't do this too soon. I make the mandatory pair only after I'm done reading from here to here, right? Only after I'm done reading the whole thing will I start looking for a mandatory pair. But that's what a mandatory pair would look like. These were supplemented by processors from Intel, which by mid 2000s translated dominance of PC semiconductors into a near monopoly. So by 2000s, there was near monopoly in the server market of some company, Intel. Rooms and servers began to replace computer mainframes in the 1990s. All right. And back then, they were owned by companies and installed on their premises. Back then, they were owned by companies and installed on their premises. So A is referring multiple times to some other sentence, some other prior sentence. We need to find out what that sentence is. All right. So now what I'm going to start with is not something like sentence E, which is simply saying once again, because I know prior to it some change is discussed, but I don't know when. I would prefer to start with a clue like this. Back then, they were owned by companies and installed on their premises. The reason why I prefer to start with sentence A is because it has these three clues, and installed also is a clue, right? Because that tells me prior to sentence A, there is some sentence which is referring to they, which is something plural, back then, which is a specific time frame, and something that can be installed. So they is referring to something that can be actually installed. This tells me that the pair that I'm trying to make, the mandatory pair or the compulsory pair that we're trying to make, is BA, right? And BA is telling us a story. BA is telling us that rooms and servers began to replace computer mainframes in the 1990s. So back then in the 1990s, rooms and servers were owned by companies, and these servers were installed on their premises. So BA is your first pair. Now, if you have BA and you're certain that BA is going to, now notice simply BA is not good enough for me to start looking for it here, right? Because I can make a mistake. What I want to do is I have BA and I know that the author is generally telling me the story of servers being installed by companies and how that played out, right? These servers mostly ran on chips made by IBM and HP Tech of the day, and so on and so forth, right? So I can make a larger sequence, which is BAD. And I know this entire sequence is talking about servers installed by companies and the time frame. So now that I have this, I can quickly go through these and I can eliminate every other option except option C, or except option 3, BADCE, right? Now, before I mark, and this is important because we haven't solved the full thing. We haven't solved the full thing. We've just come up with either BA, or my preference is actually to come up with at least like a partial sequence, because the XAT parajumble is always going to be 5 sentences. It's not going to be 4 sentences, by the way. All right. So it's a 5 sentence parajumble. So at least come up with a partial sequence like this and then start looking for it. So this is what we're going to try and do. Once we have this, we read the full thing and we notice the author is telling us this: when uh, servers replaced computer mainframes and something played out. There was some company which was dominant for a while, which is Intel, and now Amazon is essentially selling its server capacity. And today we know that Amazon is the dominant player in terms of server space. All right. So BADCE is the correct sequence. The method is what you want to remember and stress on, right? Those of you who've attended these classes before know that I stress on being methodical, because that is what is going to assure us marks. Remember, this entire process of simplifying, evaluating, uh, answering all these questions must be true, concluded. All of this depends on us being very methodical with the solving process and us looking for evidence. Since I have three pieces of evidence, I know that this is a great place to start and this is guaranteed. Once this is guaranteed, I can also find this part, and then my marks are guaranteed, right? So remember to be methodical. Let's try and look at a critical reasoning question from XAT. Those of you who got it right, great. I noticed that some of you have gotten it right. Others, please participate. All right, let's start with this critical reasoning question. All right. Based on the above information, which of the following statements must be true? Right? We've already looked at this question stem before. This is a critical reasoning question. By the way, all the questions that I've made today are from the 2024 and the 2023 paper. One question is from 2022 XAT paper. All right. Let's go through the passage first. You may accumulate a vast amount of knowledge, but it'll be of far less value to you than a much smaller amount if you have not thought it over for yourself. So the author is saying this accumulation of a vast amount of knowledge is not really valuable unless you have thought over it yourself. Now, this is why, because only through ordering what you know. So first you get knowledge, then you order that knowledge in a, like, you, it's not chaotic, you've ordered it in some logical fashion. You've compared that knowledge with other facts, and then you can take complete possession of your knowledge. Okay. So the author is trying to say simply having a lot of knowledge or a vast amount of knowledge is not useful unless and until you have actually done something specific, which is thought about it yourself. Now, thought about it yourself has been further defined. So we'll just mark how it's further defined. Step one of thinking about it yourself is ordering what you know, right? How do you order what you know? You compare things with each other truth, with other truths, etc., etc., right? And then you take complete possession of your knowledge. So you need to do, let's say, these three things, and then this amount of knowledge, whatever that amount of knowledge, will be of value to you. Okay. Now, based on the information, which of the following statements must be true? It has to be true, right? This is what we're looking for, must be true. Each sentence could have something problematic which we are expected to identify and then mark a particular option as valid or invalid, right? So let's start with, I just, for the sake of, me explaining this, I'm saying let's start with 5, right? If she has, and by the way, all of the here they're saying if she has, this could be if he has, if this can be replaced with one has, all of these changes won't make any difference, right? If she has mastered the knowledge, one moment, if she has mastered the knowledge, she might have reflected on the information. So one is, like I told you, always be methodical. Second is read each option. This applies to RCs, this applies to critical reasoning questions, parasummary, everything with options. I break down each sentence into parts and then check if it's acceptable or not. If she has mastered the knowledge, right? To master knowledge, if you notice this mastering of knowledge, which is used in each sentence, but we'll not go there right now. We'll say, like, let's assume we started with sentence 5. Mastered is used to replace complete possession. I'll just color code this. Mastered is used to replace complete possession of your knowledge, right? To have complete possession of your knowledge, you need something specific. You only through ordering, only through comparing will you get complete possession, right? So she might have reflected on information is invalid. This is not true. The reason why it's not true is this might have is not the same as only through, right? You only tells us that you have to order your knowledge, you have to take complete possession of it, and only then will you master knowledge. So you might have reflected on the information makes 5 incorrect. Let's look at 3. If she reflects on the information, she will master the knowledge. Now, will is saying that now if she, he, one, or any random person will reflect on the information, then they will master the knowledge. This idea of will master the knowledge tells us that 100% odds of, or 100% chance of uh, everyone mastering knowledge. This is invalid, right? The author didn't say that if you reflect, you will master the knowledge. There's still a lot of processing of information that is required. So 3 and 5, in short, will and might, these specific words have made 3 and 5 invalid. Now, to simply, by the way, this all of this uh, thinking about yourself, sorry, thinking about it for yourself. Thinking about it for yourself has been replaced in this in these options as reflect. Correct? In all of these options is replaced with this word reflect. But here this reflector is meaningless. This is actually trying to say a surface which will reflect light, for example. To reflect, to reflect upon something is to think about a particular idea. Reflector of information is simply you're trying to, it's not a real thing, but it doesn't make any sense. It's like knowledge is rebounding off of you. So reflector makes the second option invalid. So we have reflector invalid, will invalid, might invalid. Now compare options 1 and 4. They sound the same. They sound like mirror images of each other. Right? Options 1 and 4 sound like mirror images of each other. 1 says if she wants to master knowledge, she must reflect on the information. 4 says if she has not mastered knowledge, she must not have reflected on the information. So, by the way, for this condition, if she has not mastered knowledge, if she has not mastered knowledge, could have multiple reasons. For example, it could be not enough quantity, right? You need to accumulate some amount of knowledge, right? So maybe there's not enough quantity. So she must not have enough quantity, also could be true in this case. Or it must be that if she has not mastered knowledge, she has reflected on it, but she maybe could not order knowledge, or she couldn't get through the chaos of knowledge. It was too challenging for her, whatever subject she's studying. So we don't know the reason for not mastering. In short, the reasons for not mastering knowledge could be multiple. We don't know if this is the only specific reason for not mastering knowledge. So this makes 4 invalid. She must not have reflected. She, if this was replaced with, suppose, let's say option 1 is not there. In case option 1 is not there, if must was replaced with may, option 4 would have been perfectly acceptable if option 1 wasn't there. But that's not the case, right? This is must and option 1 is there. Option 1 is right. If she wants to master knowledge, she must reflect on the information, right? This is what she has to do, and only then can she hope to master knowledge. So 1 is the right choice. Those of you who've gone with 1, great. All right, let's try and solve. Let's try and solve this. This is a previous year question. Please get started with this. Right. Let's start with this question. Which of the following statements most seriously weakens the conclusion drawn in the passage? Uh, Remember to be accurate with this question type, which is strengthening, weakening question type. You have to be really good at identifying this, right? And in this case, they're asking for a conclusion, and it can be concluded is given to us, so it's fairly easy. But if this was the argument made by the author, right, and sometimes the passage will not say something as clear as this, right? So identifying this is always a challenge: the argument, the hypothesis, the conclusion. So first step is figure out if you have understood and correctly identified this. Then think of what weakening it would look like, and then go through the options. So I'll explain that process. Remember, the method is what is going to guarantee us our marks. So stay very rigid about the method that you're trying to apply in terms of the solving process. Practice that method over and over again. All right. We are told people rely on private online information. Individuals who experience depression will often attempt to understand their predicament and seek remedy. So people rely on online news. People who have challenges like depression will look for remedies online. And then the author says a recent report says that there exists evidence of many searches comprising the word depression during and just after elections in country Y. So it can be concluded that election is experienced by many people in country Y as a truly psychologically traumatizing event, and as such being potentially depressionogenic, or basically potentially it can cause people to experience depression. All right. So we want to weaken this conclusion. Conclusion is that election in country Y is psychologically depression causing, right? So we want to weaken this conclusion. So we want to say, therefore, uh, depression in Y is not true, right? Not true meaning this could be not possible, or this could be not achievable, not feasible, right? And now, like, I'll give you a random option, but this option also provided, let's say कि ये पांचों options आपके पास नहीं है, this random option could also be like considered as a valid weakening option. Let's say I give you something like a research tells that genetically the people in country Y do not have any predisposition for depression, right? So that will tell us that, or something like that, right? Or people in country Y do not experience depression. So that will say that, oh, people in country Y, it's not feasible for them to get depressed. So therefore, our conclusion is weak. So we want something that will weaken the author's conclusion. And now that we have figured this out, we'll go through each option, right? Let's look at 5. A survey in country Y shows that an election can cause significant increase in the average level of depression. So country Y shows, the survey shows increase in depression. So option 5 would strengthen the conclusion, right? And not weaken the conclusion. So option 5 is invalid. The other way to ask this question is strengthen. Here they've asked weaken. Option 5 says strengthen. It's not our answer. Uh, Depression related advertisements are on the rise and during and just after the election in country Y. So if this is true, depression related advertisements are on the rise during and just after election in country Y. This is a previous year question. This is 2023 question. Many students actually went with option 4. Let me see what people have gone with here. Many people have gone with option 4 in the exam. The reason being, people felt if advertisements are high, therefore more people search, right? Based on ads. So if there are more ads, more people will search. But we don't know. This is like the chicken and egg. We don't know if the ad comes first or if the search comes first, right? Maybe people know that people are searching, like advertisers know what people are searching for and therefore they put ads, or it's the ads that causing people to search. We don't know which came first. So 4 is, we don't know if it's weakening or strengthening. So neutral, invalid. Let's look at 3. Election is a festival. People happily choose their leader. In some countries, this doesn't apply to our case. So option 3 is invalid for saying some countries. Many people do not use the internet in country X. This is not about depression during elections at all. This is not about country Y at all. So option 2 is invalid. Let's look at 1, which is the right answer. Per day sale of antidepressant drugs is constant across the years in country Y. So actual sale of antidepressant drugs did not change during that election time. So that this tells us that this election is experienced as uh, depression by many people in country Y is actually invalid, because the sale of antidepressant drugs is constant. It did not rise. We would expect a concomitant rise, right? There's no rise. So 1 weakens the conclusion. I hope this is clear. Let's see the next one. Okay, this is the same question type. Which of the following, if true, would most significantly strengthen the conclusion? This is a previous year's ad question. You would have to go and look this up. I want to actually show you some fill in the blank questions and then actually bring the class to an end. So we and a grammar question as well. So please go through this fill in the blank question first. And after this question, we'll actually go through the grammar questions. So if you notice, fill in the blanks meaningfully in the above statement from the following options. In this case, you have 4 blanks, right? And here you'll notice again you have 4 blanks. The sentence in question 6 is longer than question 5. Sometimes these have inflated to be like 200-word paragraphs, or sometimes these are shorter sentences. What I want you to remember for these is, first you read the entire sentence or the entire paragraph or whatever is the material, right? After reading that entire thing and generally getting a grasp of what the author is trying to say, then you start replacing it with words, right? So while startups have dash reach and dash, they introduce dash products to open up dash markets. Correct. So we know that the author is talking about some kind of reach that startups have, and that reach increasing. We know increase in reach because they open up other markets, right? So initially that reach was not there; it was achieved later. So in all these words could be possible: limited, restricted, etc. So this is of no help. We know this is talking about some kind of limitation or restriction. All right. So this is not helping us. We generally have estimated what could go here. But remember, all of this started with us reading and figuring out the sentence first. Dash they introduce. Now, since they introduce or when they introduce, so we want something that will tell us that clearly they're introducing some new kind of products, and then they open up more markets. Correct? So we know which word has to go here: more markets, right? So it cannot be innovative markets. That doesn't make any sense, right? It has to be new markets. So one of these two. Uh, while they introduce new products, or when they introduce new products, this could be another possible thing. I'm just looking to see if. All right. Others also, please try and answer these questions. These are easy questions. Like, I can understand you not answering critical reasoning questions, but these are relatively easy. All right. So while they introduce innovative products. So this does not make sense, right? It's actually the change of them introducing new products that leads to the new markets opening up. So the change is when they introduce new products. So startups have limited reach when they introduce new products, or innovative products. They open up new markets, right? So I estimated my way to the answer. What I wanted to show through all of this was I estimated my way to the right answer. If I don't know the main point of the author first, if I don't know the general narrative direction the author is taking, it's very hard for me to figure out which is right. Correct? And all of these could be right. uh, these could not be right. This we realized later. Based on that, we narrowed it down to options 2 and 3. And then based on while versus when, we went with option 2. Correct? So, what I wanted to highlight from all of this is studying word power made easy or going through flashcards is not as helpful as learning how to work these questions, right? Find a way to work around these questions. Please try and do this with the next question as well. All right. All right. Oil painting did to appearance what capital did to social dash. So now the author is comparing oil painting and its impact on appearance, just like the impact of capital on social something. We don't know what that is. It reduced everything to dash of objects. So this oil painting, just like capital, reduced everything to something to objects, either similar to objects, dissimilar to objects, something like that. So we can estimate what could go here. We don't really have a good estimate of what could go here. If you notice, it could be justice, relations, reality. Construction doesn't really make sense. Setup is obviously invalid. Setup does not work. But I'm going to the option only for the sake of explanation. Initially, I'm simply reading the passage or the blank, and I'm trying to figure out what the author is essentially trying to talk about. The author is saying that everything got equated to objects. Everything became object like because everything became a commodity, right? So everything was something that you could essentially put a price tag to, something that you could assign value to. All reality was mechanically dashed by its materiality. So all reality became in some way material, and you could assign value to it. Correct? So now that we've figured out what the author wanted to say, we know that social setup here does not go, right? Uh, it reduced everything to the now suppose all of these other sc- construction, if we evaluate all of these others, construction cannot go. So justice, relations, and reality we are left with. Then if we say it reduced everything to the dash of objects, right, to the randomness of objects, this doesn't make sense, right? So now we have eliminated 2, 4, and 5. We are left with 1 and 3, right? Everything became expensive because everything became a commodity. This is incorrect. Expensive, no, everything had a value, right? So expensive would become incorrect. So 1 is invalid. We are left with 3. and 3 is the right answer for this question. So if you notice, I'm estimating and grasping my way to the right answer. This is not based on memory. This is not based on me memorizing any, or doing any word power made easy. This is based on us understanding the main point and then using the options to our advantage. I think, and I'm fairly sure, the fill in the blanks and the grammar section of the XAT VA is the easiest part of it. And I've already discussed how to practice that. A quick this glance at the grammar question, and I want to bring the class to an end. Which of the following sentences have incorrect usage of the preposition? What I want to highlight is, don't sit and study preposition chapter first from Wren and Martin. Solve a lot of questions, and when you get a question wrong, then you quickly go and take a glance at the preposition chapter, right? Here, where preposition is like preposition, they tell it, these words tell us the relationship between two objects, right? Such as the manager was sitting at the desk. This is valid. If you said on the desk, it would be incorrect, right? Someone sits at their desk. So this is valid. It's correct. My work is superior to yours. Suppose I don't know, this may be correct, incorrect. I prefer coffee than tea. This is definitely incorrect, because when you say prefer, it will be prefer coffee to tea, right? I'm trying to show you something here. So 2 I'm uncertain about, but 3 I'm certain is incorrect, right? If I'm certain 3 is incorrect, if you notice, 3 is in every option, and the reason being 3 is like relatively easy. Has anyone typed in their answers? All right. So okay. So 3 is incorrect for sure. Let's look at 4. She was accused for stealing gold, right? So she was accused for stealing gold is incorrect. She was accused of stealing gold. I prefer coffee to tea, right? So I found 2 errors. Now I know 3 and 4 are errors. So 3 and 4 are present here and here and here, right? So I need to know the remaining sentences as well. This is an exception to the rule. No problem here. They're leaving to England soon. They're leaving for England soon. So 3, 4, 6. These are incorrect uh, ways to use prepositions, right? So C is the right answer in this case. And again, when you get this question wrong, if you get this question wrong, then you go and study. So grammar should be where 10% of your time is spent with books, 90% of your time is spent with questions. All right. I've repeated this, ad nauseum, so I don't want to continue extending the class further. I want to bring the class to an end. We have a detailed XAT program. So those of you who are interested can actually sign up for it. And we have those of you who find XAT decision making quite tricky. We have a specific program for the XAT decision making aspect also, and you can actually go and sign up for it, and you can read about it online. All right, so we have further classes coming up for XAT, and I'll cover these questions in detail. But I hope this introductory class was of some value to you. I've discussed these questions and how to solve them in detail in the series that you'll find. So please go to our channel and search through the VA questions that I've done in the live classes prior. You'll find all of these questions being discussed, question types being discussed, and the right method to solve them as well. So go through those, and I assure you they'll be of value. Please leave us your comments and tell us what you want us to cover in the classes to come. So that's it from me today, everyone. And I'd like to bring the class to an end. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. That's it. Good night.